What does it mean to disagree about facts with someone you respect and who is acting in good faith? Facts should have one truth value, and you're both looking for the truth, so how can you disagree? An obvious answer might be that one person is missing some information, but we still have disagreements when everyone has access to all the information. What if you're both wrong? And we can think about it with battling argument robots. Arguments carry baggage with them that you might not always be thinking about. They are coupled together under the hood, even though you think you're arguing about something in isolation. We'll get into more technical concepts in a second, but for now let's imagine a specific argument as a battling robot, or argubot, you send your opponent. Maybe it does a zap attack, made possible by a lightning core, which is super effective on your opponent's argubot. Your opponent, your friend, is just kind of pissed. Even if your attack demolished his argubot, he wasn't using a lightning core and didn't think they were fair game for this battle. You haven't convinced him of your superior argubot, he's just upset or confused. Now this is the best case scenario where you're both making your argubots yourselves. But what if you just picked one up at your local argubot vendor and you don't even know if it's using a lightning core yourself? Yes, I love robots, and yes, I will use any excuse to bring them up, but I'm describing arguments this way to help talk about the lens of cognitive decoupling, which I find a really compelling way to understand disagreements. First described by Canadian psychologist Keith Stanovich, cognitive decoupling is the ability to hold different context when making an argument. An example of this is playing devil's advocate, where you construct an argument made from parts of someone you disagree with. Going back to argubots, this would be analogous to being able to build an argubot from different sets of parts. I find it useful to talk about which sets of parts people consider relevant when making their argument. Let's try an interactive example. I'm going to give a statement, and you can pause if you like. Think about whether you agree with the statement, and what arguments you would give for or against it. Electric cars are good for the environment. Okay, so now think about what information and context you were taking into account with your argument. What set of roboparts did you use to make your argubot? You might have said something like, electric cars are good for the environment because they run off battery power instead of fossil fuels, in which case you may be thinking about the context of the car itself. If you zoom your context out, you might say, electric cars are bad for the environment because the power used to charge the batteries is likely coming from fossil fuels. But you might couple some technical information to your argument, like, electric cars are good for the environment because even though power plants often run off fossil fuels, they are more effective at extracting energy from combustion than car engines, even accounting for the power wasted while traveling along power lines to your house. You might object to the idea that humans can impact the environment at all, in which case you might say, electric cars are not good for the environment because they have no impact whatsoever. You might even couple societal contexts and say, electric cars are bad for the environment because buying one is a way to feel you've done your part, but will make you less likely to put effort into lobbying the government to make actual carbon emission regulations. If you have another argument in context, add it to the comments, I'd be interested to see. You and your friend might agree about the importance of addressing climate change, but can disagree if electric cars are bad for the environment because you're selecting different contexts or sets of parts to make your argubots. Unless people can first agree what contexts and information are relevant to the conversation, which parts you're building from, and are willing to decouple those they agree are not relevant, they will argue past each other because they're not talking about the same thing. Once you begin to recognize this pattern of disparate context couplings, you'll start to see it everywhere. You'll think to yourself, let's solve this argument by just deciding which contexts are important before we make our arguments. Should be easy, right? If you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend John Nurst's blog post, A Deep Dive into the Harris-Klein Controversy. It's a post that's trying to understand the disagreement between Sam Harris and Ezra Klein about the book The Bell Curve and its implications on IQ and race. I'll link it in the description.